Imagine for a second that you're walking down this really busy city street.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Yeah, so it's loud, right? It's completely chaotic. You're navigating through this massive crowd. You're watching the traffic lights change from green to red. And, maybe you're glancing down at a notification on your phone.
Right, just a standard Tuesday commute.
Exactly. And in that moment, you have this very distinct, unquestionable sense that the conscious you sitting right behind your eyes are the one doing all the seeing.
Of course.
Like your eyes are essentially the camera lens and your brain is the screen where the whole movie is playing out.
Yeah, that is the standard operating model, isn't it? That's how we literally get through the day. We just assume the cockpit of the body is located right there behind the forehead.
Right, but what if I told you that while your eyes are busy watching that traffic light, your knee,
Wait, my knee.
your actual physical kneecap, what if I told you your knee is watching the car drive by? And what if your elbow was perceiving the light coming from the street lamp and your skin is somehow listening to a conversation happening 10 feet away?
It sounds like the premise of a really weird body horror movie.
It totally does.
Or maybe like a very strange, highly specific superhero origin story. Like The Amazing Knee Man.
The Amazing Knee Man, exactly. It sounds completely absurd. But it is actually the jumping off point for one of the most technically complex and honestly existentially rattling discussions on biology that we have ever covered on a deep dive.
It really is. It shifts the entire paradigm of what we think we are.
It does. We are looking at this incredibly wild concept of cellular consciousness today. We're getting into the literal blueprint of our dreams.
Right.
And believe it or not, why being a stubborn person is the absolute worst strategy you could possibly have for the afterlife.
Which is a lot to unpack, and we are pulling all of this directly from a very specific, very unique source today.
Yes, let's set the stage for that.
We are diving into Session 291 of the Early Sessions, Book 7 of the Seth Material. And to be precise, this specific session was recorded on Wednesday, October 5, 1966.
1966. And the context here is super important for you listening because when people hear terms like channeled material, they usually picture, I don't know, a sterile New Age studio or some dimly lit church basement.
Right, something very formal or theatrical.
Yeah, but that's not what this was at all.
No, not even close. We're talking about a totally normal living room in Elmira, upstate New York. It's 9:20 p.m. on a random Wednesday. You have a woman named Jane Roberts who goes into this deep trance state.
Right, and her voice totally changes.
Her voice changes, her mannerisms change, her eyes get very dark, and she is speaking as this entity known as Seth. And sitting right there across from her is her husband, Robert Butts.
Who is referred to in the text as Joseph, right?
Exactly. And he's just sitting there scribbling down everything she says in rapid shorthand.
And what I absolutely love about this source material, and you really see this in the notes surrounding session 291 and the subsequent session 292, is this wild juxtaposition of the totally mundane and the deeply metaphysical.
Oh, the notes are fascinating.
They really are. Like Robert Butts is sketching the room while this is happening. There are these little mundane notes about a draft beer by Iroquois cans sitting there.
I love that detail.
Yeah, and there are these literal drawings in the margins of a lift ring pull. Those old school sharp metal tabs on soda cans that we used to slice our fingers on.
And ones you'd pull completely off the can, yeah.
Yeah.
It grounds the whole thing so perfectly, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because you have this high strangeness communication going on, discussing the intricate history of cellular evolution and the fundamental nature of the human soul. And right next to it on the coffee table is just a six-pack of draft beer.
It's so ordinary.
It reminds us that this information isn't coming down from a burning bush or etched on a golden tablet. It's filtering through into our very physical, messy, completely mundane reality.
Exactly. So our mission today for this deep dive is to unpack three specific, really mind-bending concepts from this 1966 session.
Right.
First, we're going to talk about something called generic images, which I know sounds like corporate clip art, but is actually the fundamental baiting block of your entire reality.
It's the architecture of the mind.
Yeah. Second, we're going to get into that seeing knee concept we mentioned, which Seth calls cellular consciousness.
Which is just a wild biological theory.
Truly. And finally, we're going to look at what Seth says actually happens to your ego when you die.
And a quick warning for everyone listening on that last point. The section on the afterlife is, it's very specific. If you're a total control freak in your daily life, you might really want to take notes because Seth suggests you're going to have a profoundly hard time in death.
I'm not going to lie, I definitely felt personally attacked by that section when I was reading it.
It hits a little close to home for anyone who likes to micromanage.
It really does. But before we get into the spooky existential stuff, we do need to make our standard disclaimer.
Right, of course.
This podcast is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
Yes. We are simply impartial reporters here. We aren't telling you this is absolute peer-reviewed scientific fact or some new religious doctrine you need to follow.
Right. We are just treating the source material as the facts of the session itself, and we're exploring the ideas contained within them to see what kind of fascinating insights we can extract.
Exactly. So let's just jump right into the foundation of all of this, generic images.
Let's do it. Because when I first read this term in the session notes, I honestly literally thought of stock photos.
Stock photos.
Yeah. Like when you dream, does your brain just lazily pull up a Getty Images stock photo of a dog because it's too tired to render a brand new one?
I mean, that would save on processing power.
Right. But that's not what Seth means here at all, is it?
Not at all. When Seth talks about generic images, he's describing something so much more fundamental to the universe. He actually calls them electromagnetic realities.
Electromagnetic realities. I mean, that sounds like quantum physics, not psychology or dream analysis.
Well, in Seth's view, at that deep level, they're essentially the same thing. Think of these generic images as the hard-coded symbols of the psyche. They are the memory banks of the soul.
Okay, memory banks.
Yeah, Seth explains that these images act as the ultimate base for your dreams. They exist way beneath your normal conscious awareness. So when you dream, you aren't just fabricating things out of thin air from scratch.
Right.
You are actually pulling from this ancient library of generic images, and then you're basically dressing them up in the costumes of your daily life.
Okay, so it's sort of like, are they like the wireframe models in a video game?
Well, that's a good way to look at it.
Like the fundamental structure is there, the basic geometry of the object is there, and then my individual brain just paints a specific texture on it based on, I don't know, what I saw on TV yesterday.
That's a very accurate analogy, actually. And Seth uses a very specific example in the text to explain how this rendering process works. The bull.
Right, the bull, which seems kind of random at first.
It does, but it makes sense when he breaks it down.
Mm-hmm.
Seth says there is a generic image of a bull, but it's not just a flat 2D picture of a farm animal with horns. It is a gestalt.
A gestalt meaning like a collection of energy.
Exactly, a collection of energy and inherent meaning. The generic image itself is totally neutral until the dreamer actually touches it with their consciousness. But once it's pulled into a dream, it immediately gets charged with emotional energy.
And this is where it gets really interesting to me, because he explains that the exact meaning of the bull changes entirely based on who is actually looking at it.
Right.
It's the exact same fundamental file, but it renders completely differently depending on the user.
Correct. Seth outlines a few different scenarios for this. He says, quote, some females will identify in the dream with the bull.
Which is an interesting flip on the typical symbolism.
It is. In that specific case, the bull isn't an enemy or a monster to run from. It's a representation of pure power. Or perhaps it's a masculine aspect of themselves that they are actively trying to integrate. The dreamer feels strong, they feel heavy, grounded, and they wake up feeling completely energized.
But then he flips it entirely for a male dreamer, or maybe just a dreamer with a totally different psychological mindset.
Right. For another dreamer, that exact same bull might be a rival. It suddenly represents a violent threat. Or, and I absolutely love this little bit of wordplay from the session, the bull might simply represent a person the dreamer considers bullheaded.
Yes, I actually laughed out loud at that part. It's so aggressively literal.
It really is.
So if I go to sleep tonight and I have this terrifying dream that I'm running away from a massive rodeo bull, I might wake up sweating thinking, wow, I must be deeply afraid of nature or untamed beasts.
Right. You go to some deep psychoanalysis place.
Exactly. But actually, my subconscious is just plainly saying, hey, your boss is being a total jerk right now, and here's the closest generic image file I have for a stubborn obstacle.
That's exactly how he says it works. These images are composites, and they're built up by the cells. They're intricately interwound into the dream drama.
Built up by the cells. That's a phrase we really need to hang on to.
Absolutely, because it suggests that our dreams are this fascinating, messy mix of ancient universal archetypes, these electromagnetic realities, and our totally petty, day-to-day annoyances.
It completely reframes the whole act of dreaming for me. It's not just random static or the random firing of neurons while we sleep.
No, it's highly structured.
It's like you're a director on a movie set, and you have access to this massive cosmic prop warehouse. You have the bull prop, you have the ocean prop, the falling prop, and your mind just keeps checking them out and reusing them to tell different specific stories about whatever is stressing you out that week.
And Seth takes it a step further than just dreams, which is wild. He says these images aren't just for nighttime theater, they are actually the first basis from which thought evolved.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is exactly where we start drifting into that second major topic, which I honestly think is the most radical, boundary-pushing part of this entire 1966 session.
We have to talk about the knee.
We really do.
We've teased it enough. The quote that literally stopped me in my tracks while reading this transcript was, "Your knee can see every portion of the body responds to light."
It's a staggering statement.
It is. Now, I know my knee can feel pain, especially when it's about to rain.
Right, the barometric pressure.
Yeah, and I obviously know my skin reacts to UV rays by getting a sunburn or a tan, but the word seeing implies processing visual data. It implies comprehension. How does Seth possibly justify that physically?
Okay, to understand this, we have to look at the evolutionary history that Seth provides here. He's basically taking us way, way back to the very beginning of life on Earth, to single-celled organisms.
The primordial soup era.
Exactly. The first animals, as he calls them. Seth argues that long before we had complex organs, before evolution bothered with eyes, ears, noses, the individual cells themselves possess what he calls capsule comprehension.
Capsule comprehension. Okay, can we break that phrase down? What does that actually mean?
It means that every single isolated cell had the full potential for all perceptions.
All of them.
All of them. The cell wasn't specialized yet. It didn't just do digestion or just do movement. It actually had a rudimentary, basic version of sight, sound, touch, and smell distributed evenly over its entire surface.
Okay, so a single cell, back in the day, is essentially like a microscopic Swiss Army knife. It has all the tools folded into it, just very, very small, basic versions of them.
That is exactly it. And Seth says, quote, "Before cellular specialization occurred, each cell could combine with another indiscriminately."
Indiscriminately, meaning they were totally fluid.
Yes, they were social, they were incredibly versatile, they could swap roles. But then, as evolution pushed forward, there was a drive for complexity. We started building bigger multicellular organisms.
Right.
And to do that efficiently, to survive, we had to specialize.
It's basically the corporate restructuring of the biological body.
I love that analogy. It is exactly like a corporate restructuring. Think of the early body like a small, growing startup company.
Okay.
In the very beginning, there are only 5 employees, and everyone does everything. The CEO is also taking out the trash. They're coding the website. They're answering the customer service calls. That's the unspecialized single cell.
Doing it all.
But as the company grows into this massive multinational corporation, you simply can't work that way anymore. It's too chaotic.
Right. The CEO can't be emptying the bins when there are 10,000 employees.
Exactly. You need a dedicated IT department. You need a dedicated security team. You need a dedicated janitorial staff.
So in this analogy, the eyes became the dedicated security team.
Yes. Seth says, quote, "The brain's necessary focus required more specific, less diffused, and more concentrated methods of perception." We essentially concentrated our ability to see into these 2 very specific, highly refined spheres in the front of our head, our eyes.
And we concentrated all our processing power into the brain.
Exactly. We basically outsourced the exhausting job of seeing to the eyes, so the rest of the cells in the body could just focus on doing their specific jobs, like holding up the skeleton or digesting food.
And I think this is the absolute kicker of his argument. Just because the CEO hired a janitor, it doesn't mean the CEO actually forgot how to take out the trash.
Exactly. That is the perfect way to phrase it. The cells in your knee or your liver or your skin, they are the direct evolutionary descendants of those original all-seeing Swiss Army knife cells.
They still have the old code in them.
Yes. Seth says those ancient senses didn't just disappear into nowhere, they became latent. He says, quote, "The other older perceptive mechanisms still linger on, however."
So my knee is technically right now capable of seeing, but my brain, which we can equate to the ego here, is shouting so loud and processing so much high-def data from my eyes that I just can't hear what my knee is telling me.
Well, it's not even just that the brain is shouting too loudly. Seth says the ego structurally cannot make use of those other senses anymore.
Why not?
Because the ego is a direct product of that specialization. It was built specifically to rely on the focused, high-definition, localized feed from the eyes and ears.
Oh, I see. It doesn't have the hardware to read the old
Oh,
data.
exactly.
Thought.
But the inner layers of the actual biological foundation of who you really are, is still actively using that cellular thinking process.
Cellular thinking process, that phrase is just wild because it firmly implies that there is a vast level of intelligence operating inside my body that is completely 100% separate from the conscious thoughts bouncing around in my head.
It absolutely implies that. And more importantly, it implies that your body is currently responding to the environment in ways you aren't even remotely aware of. Seth says, quote, "The organism, physically speaking, can hardly exist without them. Your physical body is constantly reading the electromagnetic environment. It is perceiving subtle light shifts and sound vibrations through the skin and the cells. And it is keeping you alive using vast amounts of data that your conscious mind is completely ignoring."
It gives a whole new literal meaning to the phrase having a gut feeling, doesn't it?
Oh, totally.
We usually just use that as a cute metaphor for intuition. But based on this, maybe your gut literally saw something, like some micro shift in the light or the energy of the room that your eyes completely missed because they were too focused on reading a text message.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. And it connects beautifully to the next major section of the session, actually. Because if our physical body is truly this massive collection of ancient, overlapping, latent senses, then it stands to reason that our identity is just as fluid and complex.
Right, because we usually tend to think of ourselves as very, very solid, like I am a man, I'm a woman, I'm exactly 35 years old.
We love our categories. We have our ID cards, our job titles. We fit perfectly in the little box we've built.
But Seth kind of takes a hammer to that box here.
He shatters the box entirely. He connects these deep generic images directly to our concepts of identity and gender. He explicitly says, quote, "You are not only male or female, as you know, but both, with one temporarily predominating."
Temporarily predominating. I love that phrasing. So currently, right now in the studio, I'm playing the specific role of a male host. But that's really just the costume I'm wearing for this specific act of the play.
According to Seth, yes. It's just a temporary focus. He brings up the concept of reincarnation here, or what he sometimes calls ancestral patterns. He says, quote, "Almost without exception, there are male and female lives, either in your past or future."
Wait, note that he says future as well,
Yes, past or future.
which heavily implies time isn't working at all the way we typically think it is.
I-
But let's stick to the gender and identity part for just a second, because this links right back to the dream state we were talking about earlier, right?
It absolutely does. Seth mentions that, quote, "Dreams at the deepest level will not respond necessarily then to your present sex identity."
And I think almost everyone listening has had that bizarre experience, or at least, heard of a friend having it, where in a dream, you just aren't you.
Right.
Maybe you're looking in a mirror and you're much younger, or you're elderly, or maybe you're a completely different gender entirely. And you wake up feeling incredibly disoriented and confused.
And usually our conscious mind just immediately dismisses it. We wake up, shake our heads, and say, "Oh, well, that was weird pizza I ate last night."
Right. We blame the cheese.
Exactly. But Seth is saying, no, don't dismiss that. That was actually incredibly accurate. In the deep dream state, your rigid ego finally relaxes. That highly specialized, narrowed focus of the brain powers down a bit.
And the borders dissolve.
And suddenly you have direct access to those other vast parts of your total identity. The parts of your soul that vividly remember being female or being male or living an entire lifetime in a completely different century.
It honestly reminds me of the draft beer can notes from Robert Butts again.
Oh, how so?
Well, the label on the can specifically says Iroquois Draft Beer. That's its ego. It announces to the world, I am a beer. But the actual metal of the can, the raw aluminum,
Yeah.
before it was stamped into that shape, it could have been a part of a car engine in the past. And after it gets recycled, it could become a soda can in the future. The underlying material itself, the soul, if you will, is entirely fluid. The paper label is just a temporary marketing tool.
That is a surprisingly deep and beautiful analogy for a 1960s beer can. But yes, that captures it perfectly. The label is temporary, the material is eternal. And this incredible fluidity applies to time as well, which you picked up on earlier with the future lives comment.
Yeah, let's get into the time aspect.
Seth drops this really beautiful, almost poetic image to explain how time works for the inner self. He says, quote, "The generic images are like lifelines. They seem to lead into your past, but these lifelines are spirals."
Spirals, that's a very distinct geometric choice compared to a straight line.
It is. Seth elaborates and says, quote, "Only the limitations of physical perception lead you to think of them in that manner." Meaning, it's only our flawed biological brain that forces us to see time as a straight, chronological line stretching behind us into the past.
I'm really trying to visualize this spiral concept.
Yeah.
If time is a spiral, then technically the past isn't way behind me at the end of a long hallway. It's just, what, one loop down on the coil?
Exactly. And the future is just one loop up. Think of a classic Slinky toy.
Okay, a slinky.
Or, actually better yet, imagine a thick stack of blank paper sitting on a desk.
Got it.
If you take a pen and draw a straight line across the top sheet of paper, that line represents your current life. It feels flat and linear to you as you draw it.
Right.
But if you take a drill and punch a hole straight down through the entire stack of paper, you go through all the sheets instantly at once. If you look at a spiral from a side angle, all those individual loops are practically touching each other.
Oh, I see. So Seth is suggesting that our generic images, those deep electromagnetic symbols like the bolt, they act like that drill. They are the vertical column that connects all the separate loops of the spiral together.
Yes, that is exactly why a powerful symbol in a dream can instantly trigger a vivid memory or feeling from what we'd call a past life. Because on that time spiral, that past life isn't 1,000 years away. It is literally right next to this current one. They're stacked directly on top of each other, separated only by the subtle curve of time.
It really makes you feel incredibly vast. And honestly, a little bit unstable.
Unstable. How so?
Well, if I'm not just this physical body, and I'm not just this specific gender, and I'm not even just locked in this specific year, what actually am I? What holds it all together?
You are an artist.
Oh, nice pivot. Did Seth say that?
Well, he kind of does. Seth actually makes this brief but fascinating detour into aesthetics during the session that I think perfectly answers your question about what holds it together.
Yeah.
He talks about why certain paintings generate a strong emotional response and manage to outlast the artist who painted them.
Yeah, I remember he addresses this directly to Robert Butts, because Robert was a working painter in his day job.
Right. Seth explains that truly great art works on us because it successfully captures these generic images. When you stand in a gallery and look at a masterpiece, say a Van Gogh's Starry Night or a Da Vinci portrait, you aren't just looking at colored pigment smeared on a flat canvas.
You're seeing something deeper.
The artist has somehow managed to tap into that underlying electromagnetic reality, that universal memory bank of the soul, and they've managed to freeze a piece of it in physical form.
So when I stand in a museum and I suddenly feel like crying in front of a painting and I have no idea why, it's not just because the painting has pretty colors. It's because the painting is actively pinging that cellular comprehension we talked about.
Exactly.
It's literally hitting my seeing me instead of my thinking brain.
Exactly. It completely bypasses the rigid, specialized ego and speaks directly to your ancient, multisensory fluid self. It visually resonates with the hidden codes that are built into the very cells of your body.
Okay, so just to recap where we are before we hit the final topic. We have established that we are, in fact, ancient, shape-shifting, time-traveling entities who are currently just hallucinating that we are highly specialized, isolated individuals.
That is, yes, that is one very accurate way to summarize it.
So given all of that vastness, the big question remains, the ultimate terrifying question. What happens when the biological show is over? What actually happens when the specialized machine breaks down and the heart stops beating?
Right, the survival of the personality. Seth gets incredibly technical here. He doesn't give us the comforting imagery of golden harps and fluffy white clouds. He talks about memory banks and psychological reorganization.
He starts by reassuring us that those generic images, the deep electromagnetic realities, they do stick around.
Yes, that is the good news. He says, quote, "They will still be yours when physical existence is finished." He explicitly calls them your memory banks in a most profound sense.
So the library survives the fire.
Basically, yes. The deep, universal symbols you engaged with and charged with your energy during life become the firm foundation of your new reality after death.
And he also mentions that our very specific ego memories, the memory of me recording this exact deep dive right now, or the mundane memory of what I had for breakfast yesterday, those eventually merge into this larger generic library over time.
They do. But the actual transition period, the moment of crossing over, that's where it gets extremely tricky. And this is exactly where Seth offers a really crucial, somewhat chilling warning. He vividly describes two main paths or survival scenarios that the ego faces immediately after death.
Is this basically the classic heaven and hell trope, like be good or get punished?
Not exactly. There is
Yeah.
no moral judgment involved here at all. It's more like a choice between the flexible place and the stuck place. Let's talk about the least acceptable survival pattern first, as Seth officially categorizes it.
Right. This is the stubborn ego scenario.
Yes. Seth says, quote, "The ego may be strong enough to insist upon its old prerogatives of control, yet too inflexible to adjust to the new conditions."
This is literally the ghost scenario, isn't it?
It really is the classic ghost haunting scenario.
Yeah.
Imagine an ego that is so utterly convinced that it is the physical body, so rigidly convinced that it is the ultimate boss, like that overbearing IT department we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Imagine that ego when the biological office finally closes down for good. It simply refuses to leave the building.
It's still clocking in. It's still trying to file TPS reports. It's frantically trying to boss the knees around, but there are no physical knees left to boss.
Exactly. It stubbornly tries to operate in a non-physical, fluid reality using rigid physical rules. It is simply too inflexible. Seth heavily implies this leads to a terrible state of confusion and self-imposed limitation.
Because you're trying to use tools that don't exist anymore.
Right. You're trying to open physical doors that aren't there. You're trying to yell with vocal cords you no longer possess. It creates a state of agonizing paralysis simply because the ego completely refuses to admit that the rules of the game have fundamentally changed.
It's actually tragic, really. It's like someone showing up to a party wearing a formal tuxedo, but it turns out the party is actually a competitive swimming match.
Okay, I like where this is going.
And instead of just adapting, they violently refuse to take off the heavy tuxedo because they keep shouting, "I'm a person who wears tuxedos. This is my identity." And so they jump in the pool and they just sink and drown in their own stubbornness.
That is a surprisingly accurate and terrifying metaphor for what Seth is describing. The tuxedo is the ego, and it will drag you down if you won't take it off.
So what is the alternative to drowning in the tuxedo? What is the healthy path forward?
The path of renewal.
Right.
Seth describes this healthy transition as the moment when the ego finally, quote, accepts the challenge of great change. It consciously allows a fundamental reorganization of its psychological processes.
Reorganization. See, even the word reorganization sounds scary to the ego. That sounds like losing yourself entirely, like ego death.
And it certainly feels like a terrifying death to the rigid part of the ego. But Seth promises that if you boldly allow this to happen, quote, identity is not only saved, but renewed. The ego must willingly submerge part of itself so that it can emerge with a much more vigorous identity.
Willingly submerges. I feel like that is the absolute key phrase of this entire section. You have to willingly let go.
You really do. You have to finally accept that you are so much more than just the highly specialized, narrow focus you portrayed in physical life. You have to actively reconnect with those vast generic images, those ancient latent senses, that deep cellular comprehension we've been discussing.
You have to remember the rest of the spiral.
Exactly. When you finally drop the tuxedo and merge with those broader realities, you become a vastly larger, more capable entity. You, as Heth puts it, accept larger portions of action.
So the grand irony of all this is that in order to truly survive death, you have to actively agree to stop being the specific, limited you that you spent your whole life trying to build up. You have to accept the software upgrade.
Precisely. Radical adaptability is the literal key to immortality.
Oh.
If you fiercely cling to your tiny limitations, if you say, I am just a man, or I am just an accountant, or I am exclusively this physical body, you violently stunt your own survival.
You stay stuck in the empty office.
Yes, but if you are mentally fluid, if your core belief is, I am a vast consciousness that temporarily experienced being a man, but I am also infinitely more, then you easily transition and thrive.
It really brings the whole session full circle back to the very beginning. The cells.
The single cells,
Yeah.
yes.
Because those original microscopic single cells were perfectly fluid. They had capsule comprehension. They could combine indiscriminately with anything. They were the ultimate adapters.
Yeah.
And then to build this physical world, we had to specialize. We had to get rigid. We developed these intense, focused egos just to function. And now, at the very end of the line, the ultimate spiritual challenge is to somehow remember how to be fluid again.
It is a perfect full circle, or perhaps a perfect spiral.
Ah, I see what you did there. Very nice.
I couldn't resist. But yes, that truly is the core beating message of Session 291. We are fundamentally built on this incredible foundation of generic images and cellular consciousness that is vastly more capable and, frankly, far more magical than our daily conscious mind ever gives it credit for.
We really underestimate ourselves.
Constantly. We spend our entire lives utterly ignoring our seeing needs and ignoring our profound dream symbols, arrogantly thinking that the tiny voice in our head is the only thing running the show. But really, we are just the tiny tip of a massive, multidimensional iceberg.
And it's important to note, the ultimate goal here isn't to violently destroy the ego.
No, not at all.
Seth explicitly says the ego emerges with a more vigorous identity. The goal is just to get the ego to stop acting like a paranoid dictator and start acting like a cooperative team player.
Exactly. To finally realize that the IT department is just one small, helpful part of a much, much larger, grander company.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I have to say, I am definitely left looking at the physical world a little differently today.
It's hard not to.
I really am. I'm looking at the concept of a draft beer can and thinking about the eternal metal beneath the label. I'm thinking about a random dream about a bull and realizing it might just be my boss.
And you're definitely looking at your knee differently.
I am staring very suspiciously at my knee right now, yes. And I want to ask you, the listener, to do the exact same thing as you finish up your commute or whatever you're doing.
Give them a piece of homework.
Just right now, wherever you are, look down at your own hand, or look at your knee, or just look closely at the blank wall next to you. And seriously ask yourself, what does this specific part of me deeply know that I, the conscious ego, completely don't know?
It is a genuinely haunting question to sit with. Your physical body is quietly responding to light, to subtle energy, to entire vast realities that your specialized brain ruthlessly filters out every second. What incredible things would happen if you finally learned to just quiet down and listen to it?
It would probably make for some very, very interesting dreams tonight, at the very least.
Oh, without a doubt.
Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating journey into session 291. It is incredibly dense, it's delightfully weird, and it is profoundly wonderful.
It really is a masterpiece of a session, and honestly, we have only just barely scratched the surface of what's in there. We covered generic images, cellular consciousness, and the survival of the ego, but there is just so much more hidden within the massive volume of the Seth material.
Absolutely, which is why we strongly encourage you to study the Seth Material books directly for yourself.
Yes, don't just take our word for it.
Right. Listening to our summaries and our analogies is one thing, but sitting down and reading the actual unfiltered sessions, seeing that incredible spontaneous interplay between Seth, Jane in a trance, and Robert taking notes, it is a totally different transformative experience. There is just so much more incredible depth than we could ever possibly cover here.
And you can easily find all of these books and a ton of more information at the New Awareness Network website. Just go visit sethcenter.com/the-early-sessions. That's where you can really, truly go down the rabbit hole for yourself.
And just a quick reminder before we go, this deep dive was created and distributed free of charge for educational purposes to help unpack these incredibly complex metaphysical ideas. We really hope it sparks some fascinating generic images in your own mind today.
And hopefully it helps you prepare just a little bit better for the great change, whenever that day eventually comes for you. Just remember the main takeaway. Don't be stubborn. Take off the tuxedo.
Exactly. Be like the original cell. Be completely fluid. Keep your knees open. Keep your eyes open. You know exactly what I mean.
I think they definitely know what you mean by now.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We will see you in the next reality.